pups are, when we're not home, the pups are in there, they got their own room. Alright. So revisit the build here. This is a build I did last week. This guy has basically had non-stop problems with it. First thing, CPU pump died. Second thing, GPU died. Third thing, now it looks like the motherboard's dead. So, going to see what is going on. Alright, welcome to this video. This is going to be something a little bit different. This is a video where I was replacing a motherboard. I kind of explained at the beginning where the owner of this computer was just straight up cursed. I replaced multiple components for him, and each time he would take it home, there would be something else wrong. So I finally am like, look, dude, your best bet is going to be just straight up replace the motherboard. We've already replaced the CPU cooler. We replaced the GPU. The only thing left to replace really is a motherboard and CPU. Thankfully, his CPU ended up being fine. So, not something he had to worry about, per se. But then again, I don't know. He didn't bring it back after this point, so I'm assuming everything's fine. But, you know, time will tell. So, first things first, I take my time. I'm going to get all the cables disconnected from the motherboard. I'm going to struggle immensely with this connector. I believe it's this one here was the 8-pin CPU power up there. There was only one cable, there wasn't two. But the way that this cooler was sitting in there, I should have 100% just gone through and removed the cooler. I would have saved myself a whole bunch of headache, and you know, it would have probably allowed me to manage the cables that were back there a little bit better, because each time I was taking this thing apart and putting it back together, I was just adding more chaos to the cable management at the back of the case. You'll notice through this whole video, not once do I ever actually open the back of the case. So, you know, there's a reason for that. Alright, we got the screws out for the motherboard, and now we're getting the motherboard out. Nice and gentle there. Only took about 5 minutes, 10 minutes, somewhere in that range. You know, it all just kind of blurs together. One thing I did want to talk about a little bit while I'm going through and doing all this is the airflow. So this case is 5000D. It's one of the ones that has the rear firing fan setup, so that you can install 3 fans on the back, 3 fans on the front, 3 fans on the top, and 1 fan in the rear. And the way I configured this when I first built it was so that the fans in the rear are using the rear holes that you see on this back panel to pull air into the case, as well as the fans on the front to pull air in the case. With the 4000D, which is the smaller version of this case, I generally will mount the cooler at the front so that I can pull air across the cooler. In this situation, we mounted the cooler at the top, so that all of the cool air that was coming in the front could be funneled through the rest of the case before it hit that, because it was a triple radiator this was one of the first X3D chips that was in this. And while yes, they do generate a metric buttload of heat, it actually wasn't so bad the first few times I ran the stress test. So I actually reconfigured the way that all of these fans and everything were set up, just to make it a little bit more accessible, because before his first CPU cooler died, it was a front mount CPU cooler. And the computer ran fine. Didn't overheat or anything. The temperatures were in the mid 40s to 60s, depending on whatever he was doing. But under load, it would start to heat up quite a bit. So I'm like, why don't we use this opportunity to just get more airflow into the case, rather than just relying on pulling air across the radiator immediately, heating up the air that's in there, and then the ambient temperature inside the case is much higher. So that was the thinking behind this. One of the things I'm doing right now, I actually had to go up front and get a case of screws, because I actually keep standoffs in the 3D printed thing you see sitting off to the right over there. And in this case, for some odd reason, one of the standoffs completely rounded out, and all of the threads on the bottom were completely destroyed. So you kind of see me working on that here. I switch up the camera angle a little bit because I didn't have a huge amount of space on the desk. And this is a full-size case. It's not a mid. I guess it's a mid-full. It's in between being the absolute biggest case Corsair makes and being their regular 4000D size case. So it's got a little bit of extra room. So I replaced that standoff, and then once I get that standoff replaced, we start working on getting all the rest of the components installed into the motherboard. We get the M.2 installed. We're going to immediately make sure we pull off the strip that goes on top of that, which is for the heat transfer of the cooling. And then we go ahead and get our RAM installed. I do make the mistake of not replacing the bracket immediately on this. You'll see I realize it now. And I start pulling the bracket off of the old motherboard and get it transferred over to the new motherboard. One other little thing you see that I do there is I actually moved the cover for the CPU socket over to the old one so that he was going to be sending that motherboard back and the motherboard manufacturer receiving that motherboard back without that cover on there. They would have immediately denied any kind of warranty he wanted to use on this. So I was like, you know what? If the new one gets messed up, that's on me. If the old one gets messed up, at least he'll get his money back for it. So I can prevent that. Now you can see it's identical motherboard. So we just move everything over. I'm very, very carefully getting everything moved over. We got the CPU actually installed. I put the old motherboard back in the box so that it doesn't get damaged. Set the motherboard off to the side, switch up the camera angle, get the computer laid down, and then start working on getting this thing installed without knocking any of the components off of the back of the motherboard. Once we get it kind of shimmied down in place, we got to make sure we pull all these wires out. I'm using blunt nose tweezers here so that I don't cut or clip any of the wires that are hanging out the back. Make sure that we don't have any fan wires sticking out the back of the case. I've done that before where the fan that's in the back has a cable that's running directly across the I/O shield because I wasn't paying attention when I slid the motherboard in. Alright, next we're going to go ahead and get the 8-pin power connector for the CPU in the top left installed, which I will repeat again would have been much easier if I just decided to remove the CPU cooler. But I'm stubborn, so I didn't. And now we're going to slowly start installing all of the screws that hold the motherboard in. So from this angle you can actually get a little bit better idea of what I was talking about with the cooling. You can see the front 2 fans are pulling from outside in. The rear 3 fans are also pulling from the outside in. And the easiest way to tell the directionality of a fan just by looking at it, if you can see the X facing you like we do in this shot right here, that's the direction the airflow is going to flow. It's going to flow towards you. Whereas the one on the back, you can't see the X. It's going to be flowing away from that. Well, that's the easiest way to tell which way airflow is going to flow across a fan. There are some manufacturers now that have reversible fan hubs so that you can completely switch the way that it actually flows. You just take it off, flip it over, pop it back in. It's got a nice little satisfying click to it. And then after you get that click, you can just mount it in there as normal. Alright, so next, I put 9 dots of CPU thermal paste on this. Why? I don't know. It was just a different thing I was doing. I just wanted to make sure that this CPU actually had plenty of thermal paste. Because like I said, it's not the hottest CPU that AMD has ever made, but the thing can definitely kick out some heat. So I wanted to make sure that there was plenty of conductivity between that CPU lid and the copper plate for the cooler. And if you don't believe that thermal paste makes a difference, there's a short that I'll link up here in the corner for you guys to look at. So we got the CPU cooler all installed. Time to get all these little finagly cables plugged back in. USB front audio and the front panel connectors plugged in. I'm going to go put my screws back. Things we have left to do once I do sit back down. CPU is all good. We just got to get the GPU installed. We have the memory installed. We have the 24-pin connector installed. And while this guy was at it, he decided to replace the GPU as well. Because, like I said earlier on, it died. His last one died. This guy was terribly cursed. Terribly, terribly cursed. But, yeah. So, looking at this, all of the cable management for this stuff, like I said, is hidden pretty well. I would say that I've had worse cable management jobs. I've also had much, much better, because as I was going and replacing parts, I wasn't pulling the back open and completely cutting all the zip ties and redoing it. Now, I probably would, just, because I don't want to end up in a situation where, hey, your CPU cooler died again. Great. Here, cut 50 zip ties to get the commander out. Once we get the video card installed and all plugged in, we are going to do a quick post. And there was a moment when this computer was posting for the first time with the new motherboard that I forgot how long it takes for modern AMD CPUs to not only learn memory, but to then post with that memory. And I started getting real nervous, like, oh, what did I break? Hopefully I didn't kill this motherboard right out of the box, seeing as this guy's curse was following me around. So, making sure everything's clear, making sure that we don't have any cables sticking out anywhere that we don't really need. And then we make sure the front panel connector is plugged in. We press the power button, and we get our rainbow puke. And from here, it's pretty much clear sailing. Like I said, the initial post for this thing, as you can see, that black screen sits there for a long time. An uncomfortably long amount of time. And then, once the CPU learns the memory, everything's fine. But the biggest problem with this is this was early on in the development of DDR5 with AM sockets. So once I got done with this, we did the BIOS update. The BIOS update actually smoothed out this process, and then the boot time was just a couple seconds after that point. So yeah, that was this video. Thank you for watching, and yeah, on to the outro. Hey, thanks for watching that video. If you liked that video, make sure you hit the like button. If you want to see more videos like this, make sure you hit the subscribe button. And I stream daily on Twitch at twitch.tv/SpecVengeance. And yeah, if you want to learn more about my services, check out Bradenton PC Repair.com. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.